Next, we're going to disconnect the transfer case from the transmission. So that's going to be all these 14mm bolts. There's some on the back side here and then the front side here. But we're just going to go all the way around, disconnecting these 14mm bolts and then separate it from the transmission. Okay, so we're taking a rubber mallet and putting it against the transfer case and then using a weight to hit it, and that will help separate the transmission. You'll see it start to come apart. And you want to do this evenly because you have the shaft going through the middle, so we'll come over here and try to do the same thing, maybe down here or right here. A few gentle taps. There you go. So as it starts to separate, we've twisted it here onto its side so we can hit it here. So we've just put our rubber mallet there and then just hit it with that weight again. So just hit it there with the rubber mallet. In between is the insulator, and as you can see, it's separating and it's put together on these dowel pins. So once it comes off of those, it'll separate straight away. Okay, so there it is separated now, and just remember it's these dowel pins here that are guiding it and kind of holding it on at the last part. Now, something that I was doing along the way is putting all of these bolts right back where they came from. So now I'm going to go and transfer these over directly to the new transmission everywhere that we had them. So that way you have every bolt that was taken out in its proper place. You'll also notice that you'll need these transmission cooler line bolts. You know, just anything that you notice the new transmission does not have, you'll want to swap over. So now we have the transmission on the transmission jack, and we've run our chain here. So as you can see, it locks into this side, it goes over the other side, and this screw system is how you tighten it up. However, it's a little bent, so we wedged just the handle in here just to keep this tight. But now we're gonna put it back under the truck, and you'll notice it might not clear. So we're gonna lift the back of the jack up to tilt it forward to get that bell housing under it, but then we'll get it in there and put it on. And at this point, we're gonna do the transmission and mount it, and then we're gonna put the transfer case back on. Okay, so make sure that you turn the torque converter so that you have this hole, or one of these holes at least, right here in the bottom. Because as you go to line the flywheel up, you're going to have to turn it back and forth with the crankshaft in order for that hole on the flex plate to line up with it. If you didn't do that, which we actually didn't do, we did find a way to spin the torque converter. And so what we did was wrapped electrical tape around the bolt here, and then we shoved it into the hole of the flex plate so that it was stiff and we knew it wasn't going to come out. And then when you turn that flywheel, or the flex plate with the crankshaft, it will catch and it will spin it around. Now you'll have to go all the way around, and so then when it gets to this point, then you can take it out, spin that flex plate just a little more, and that hole will line up for you to put the bolt in. Okay, so the transmission's now under the truck. We're just lining it back up here, and we're going to be going after pretty much these dowel pins that you see in the side of the engine block there. There's one on each side, and that's what we're lining up first of all on the front of the bell housing into these holes. And so we're also just going to line up the other bolts and run them in as it gets up there, but we're not going to force the transmission on with the bolts, just use them to help align it. So remove these bolts here that are holding these in place, get them out of the way, and make sure the transmission's tilted backwards so that it doesn't, so the torque converter doesn't fall out. Okay, so we've lined everything up here, and so as you can see, we're putting a few of these bolts in to help guide the transmission into its spot. We are for sure not forcing anything on, just using these to help align it. And as you can see, the dowel pins up in there, I don't know if you can see it from here, but it's in place and it's close. So using these bolts to help align everything is a good way to get it set up. Then you can just kind of shake the transmission back and forth a little bit in order to make sure it seats properly. But you want to make sure you're not smashing the dowel pins. Just got to make sure that it goes on. You just got to shake it on basically and use these bolts just as guides. This is what we're using, our 17mm with this U-joint attachment, a whole bunch of extensions, and then our socket wrench. Okay, so we're coming in with our ratchet here. You can see we're getting on one of these top bolts, more towards the top at least. And we're just using our long extensions. See if I can show you this here. Just a whole bunch of extensions with a ratchet way back here, and that U-joint wobbly head on there, which would be that twistable black piece right there that you can see in the middle of the screen. That's what's allowing us to get that angle. So go ahead and tighten that one down. For the top center bolts, you'll just want to reach down in here until you can feel it and put that socket wrench and the socket and the U-joint on the bolt just by reaching down in there, feeling it and getting it on there while your friend from below tightens it. Okay, so now we're just rolling the transfer case under. We dropped it down together as one piece. We're just putting it on as two. And so we're just having to watch out for the exhaust because it's still on. You can take the exhaust off if you want. But what we're going to do is lift the tail shaft of the transfer case up over the exhaust so it's clearing, then lift it up and then put it on the transmission. So as you can see, we've just brought this in this way. The tail shaft is now clearing as we lifted up this little circle turn in the exhaust, just like how we took it out. So now that we're up over that, we can continue to lift this up and line it up to the transmission. If you just want to take out these bolts, you can drop that rear part of the exhaust, but those bolts were rounding, so we just left them alone. Okay, this really took some moving around to get this to line up and go in. We turned the tail shaft a little bit to line that input-output shaft up and got it on there. Next, we wiggled it until the dowel pins were lined up at the top, and now we're just running some of these bolts in very gently just to help get it all lined up and pushed together. Just remember never to drive any of these bolts in as a way of putting the transmission together. It needs to go in smoothly, the transfer case to transmission. So next we're going to connect these vacuum lines up here. So as you can see, it's these three lines. They're all different lengths. So the first one connects back into this tube, and then you just follow the transmission back. There's one at the very back here that went into that connection, and then there was one here on the side that went into this tube here. So we also just pushed this connection back into its bracket place to hold it in place. And so now we'll take this bracket here and reattach it as well. So just reattached our transmission bushing mount thing here, two 17mm bolts on each side to mount it back to the transmission. And we'll take these off when we go to lift that cross member bar up there, but they're just there so we didn't lose them. Okay, so I'm just going around and reconnecting all of these plugs that we took out in the first place. So just work your way around the transmission and you'll find where they all go. There's one there. And all the plugs are pretty much different, so they only go into one connector. You really can't mess them up too bad. We're just putting all these back into their plug deals there. So just go around and connect what you can. So we have the shift connection back here, together here, and the bracket for that was holding it. Okay. Alright, so our first bolt's in and we're rotating the crankshaft with our breaker bar up front. 3/4 inch drive for this one. And so we're just rotating it until each of these holes are lining up, and then we're putting in our flex plate to torque converter bolts. We are using some thread locker on these bolts too, these torque converter to flex plate bolts. Okay, and so now we're just putting our dust cover shield back on here. It's a little 10mm bolt. Okay, so we're lifting our cross member back into place, and it's a tight fit, just as hard as it was to get out. So we've lined up our 3 transmission studs there with none of the nuts on them yet. And as this is getting up into here, we're basically having to take our 25-pound weight and pound it here to get it to get up into that little area. So you can hit this with some liquid wrench for lubricant to try to help it go in better, but ultimately we need to line up those 3 holes here and get the bolts through there. Okay, so you want to do... Okay, so we've been pounding this one up with our 25-pound weight, and on the other side supporting with a jack and lifting, because as you pound one side in, the other wants to pop out. So go ahead and keep lifting on that side now that we're somewhat in here, or maybe we'll try to put a bolt through here first if we can get that to line up. Alright, we used our weight right here sandwiched between our jack to push on that corner, and it popped it into place pretty good. We're just getting those 2 bolts in, and we're going to have to pound things around to get these 2 bolts to finally fit in, and then just put the nut on the back side of them and tighten it down. Okay, so just make sure you tighten the bolts on the back side and the front side at the same time. So you need to put a wrench on one side and a socket on the other and tighten those. And we're doing that both sides here. Just putting this cross member back in place. Next, we reinstalled our heat shields up here. Those were just 2 10mm nuts because the studs were already coming out. We just did that on both sides. Next, we're sliding the drive shaft right back in. So we've cleaned this up on the very front, and now we're sliding it back into the transmission. And remember, when we hook it up here, we want to find our scratch marks in the back of the U-joint area there to make sure that it lines up back with the flange where we took it off. Okay, so you can see our scratch mark lined up there. So we have it in the right spot. We're just going around and tightening all 4 of these. And so we're just using 2 17mm wrenches to do this and get it on real good and tight. You can use a breaker bar as well, just to do make sure you get it snug. Next, we lifted our catalytic converter back up into place. So it had the 3 studs that it went on, so we just lined them up. And we're tightening one from down here, and we're using our bendable head 14mm for that to get onto that one. It's kind of a tight space. Then on the passenger side in the wheel well, we had access to our other 2 bolts here. They're actually exhaust nuts, and so we're just tightening those down as well, 14mm. Okay, and then from the driver's side in the engine bay, we're reconnecting the exhaust. You can fit a ratchet on it from here, and you can even fit a bendable head ratchet on that other bolt next to it if you want to from the engine bay. But that's how we're reconnecting those exhaust bolts for the driver's side. So on this exhaust bolt, you can also do it with a deep socket 14 with that U-joint and a nice extension here. Just another way of getting up in there if you want. Then that last bolt on the driver's side here that's facing forward, really wish they had it coming down, but anyway, best way for that was that bendable 14mm again, just to get onto the back side of it there. So now we'll just connect them here just by lining them up and bolting them on both sides. Okay, so now on the passenger side, we're going to come in and reconnect our O2 sensor. So it's just this plug right here. It just goes back into that plug. Remember to put the switch down to lock it into place. Okay, so just click back into place, and once again we push that gray lever down to snap it and lock it in place. Now we'll just do the same thing on the driver's side. So that's over here down on this side. Okay, so this is the driver's side. We're just lining these up. And there is this little channel that goes all the way through, so that's how you know if you're on the right side. So we're going to clip that together, and then push this locker down. Okay, so it's together and that lock is down there. And we'll just put it back here into its little clip where it belongs. Next, our heat shield just goes in back into place with those 10mm bolts. All 3 of those. And do that on the other side as well. So then you'll want to reinstall the drive shaft for the transfer case. So it's just 4 bolts on this end and then 4 on this side. And you can usually, if you have a ratcheting wrench, just use 1 wrench and those bolts kind of lock into place and allow you to tighten it. If not, you'll have to put a 14mm on each side. Okay, so in the passenger fender well, we're going to take out this 10mm bolt right here. It was one of the last ones that's holding the dipstick tube for the automatic transmission. And we're just going to take that out to give us a little more up and down movement as we go to reinstall it. So I want to show you here on the old transmission, you will get an O-ring in the kit, and as you can see, it fits perfectly down inside the dipstick 2 hole. So make sure you get that one down in there first. It'll just sit right on that ledge when you press it down in there. Okay, so before we drop this dipstick tube in, we're putting our O-ring down inside. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put our dipstick tube back in here. It has 2 10mm bolts, and they gave us a new O-ring that we'll put on first, and then a gasket that fits on there too. So there's our new gasket installed. We just slid the old one off and put the new one on. Okay, so when connecting our dipstick tube back in here, make sure you pull the little red cap out first, if it's still in there. Then we're going to put our piece back up in here with its new gasket that they've given us. So just for reference, this is how this piece goes on. You have the lip part pointed down, that goes down in, and so this is going to go on top of that, and then both of them will go down into the housing area. Let's see how the tube has a piece sticking down. So it goes like that, and then down in. Alright, next we're going to lift our starter gasket into place, and so it goes in this way. That way it matches up with the transmission, the 2 starter bolts. So then we'll just put our starter straight into here, and the longer bolt goes in the bottom, and the shorter bolt goes in the top. So the bigger bolt goes in the bottom, and it comes in from the back, and the smaller bolt for the transmission goes in the top, and it comes in from the front.